Okay, so there's no doubt we are living through a massive global energy crisis, right? It's painful, it's disruptive, but what if I told you that according to the International Energy Agency's latest outlook, this exact crisis could be the very thing that triggers a historic turning point for our entire energy system? It's a wild thought. Let's dive in and see how they get there. And look, the IEA is not mincing words here. They come right out and say it. This is the world's first truly global energy crisis. It's not just another price spike. Nope. This is a deep, ongoing shock to the whole system, triggered by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Now, you'd think all this chaos would mean we'd retreat to what we know, right? Double down on fossil fuels for security. But here's the crazy part. What if the exact opposite is happening? What if this crisis is actually hitting the gas pedal on the beginning of the end for the fossil fuel era? Okay, so to really get our heads around that surprising conclusion, we first have to take a hard look at the scale of the immediate crisis. We need to understand the pain it's causing right now. I mean, the shock waves have just been immense. They've rippled through literally every part of the economy. We're talking about disrupted supply chains, fractured trade relationships that have held for decades, and of course, consumers everywhere feeling it right in their wallets. But on the flip side, for oil and gas producers, it's been an absolute windfall, a staggering one. Get this, the IEA projects their global net income in 2022 could hit nearly $4 trillion US dollars. That's not a typo, trillion. That's double what it was in 2021. It's a number that's just hard to even wrap your mind around. But let's immediately contrast that number with the human cost, because it's just stark. That same toxic mix of the pandemic and this energy crisis means an estimated 70 million people who just recently got access to electricity for the first time, are now at risk of losing it. It's a brutal reminder of just how unequal the impacts of this crisis really are. All right, so that's the painful reality we're dealing with. But this is where the story takes a really fascinating and honestly unexpected turn. The IAE report shows that this crisis is actually forcing governments all over the world to completely rethink their energy policies. And here it is. This is the big takeaway. For the first time ever, the IEA is projecting that we can actually see a peak in global demand for every single fossil fuel. I'm talking coal, oil, and natural gas. And this is just based on policies that are already in place today. This has literally never happened before. Okay, so how do they figure this out? Well, the IEA uses a few different scenarios. The main one we're going to focus on is called STEPS. That stands for Stated Policies Scenario. Basically, it's what happens if we just stick with the government policies that are already on the books today. There are more ambitious ones, but let's stick with STEPS for now, the most conservative. So, in this scenario, just based on today's rules, what does that peak actually look like? Well, for coal, demand peaks globally within the next few years. For natural gas, demand hits a plateau by the end of this decade. And what about oil? It levels off in the mid-2030s and then starts a slow decline. The key thing here is that even without any new ambitious policies, the era of endless growth for fossil fuels is coming to an end. So, what's driving this historic shift? If fossil fuel growth is ending, what's replacing it? Well, it's the birth of a whole new clean energy economy. And believe me, it is happening way faster than almost anyone expected. You know, the report actually uses the word turbocharged, and I think that's perfect. This crisis has basically forced governments to hit the accelerator on their plans for renewables, for efficiency, for things like low-emissions hydrogen. It's no longer a nice-to-have, it's a must-do. And make no mistake, this is a global thing. You've got the huge Inflation Reduction Act in the US, you've got the Repower EU plan in Europe, Japan's pushing its Green Transformation Initiative, and then you have China and India who are just pursuing these massive clean energy targets. When you put it all together, that's some serious sustained momentum. And hey, if you want to know where the future's heading, just follow the money. In 2021, global clean energy investment was around $1.3 trillion. Just with current policies, that number is set to jump to over $2 trillion a year by 2030. And if we really want to hit net zero, we're talking over $4 trillion. That is a tidal wave of cash that is fundamentally reshaping our entire energy system. But you know what's really, really interesting about all this is the change in mindset. For the longest time, major economies treated renewables as, a climate solution. Important, but separate. Not anymore. Now they're seen as a fundamental cornerstone of energy security. And that, my friends, is an absolute game changer. Okay, but let's not get ahead of ourselves here. It's easy to hear all this and think the problem is solved. It's not. This isn't going to be a simple, smooth ride, and the IEA is very clear about the serious challenges that are still ahead of us. They basically lay out 4 huge hurdles we need to clear. First, we need to build resilient supply chains for all this new tech. Second, we have to find a way to speed up the permitting process for new projects. Third, we've got to close the investment gap for emerging economies. And finally, and this is maybe the most important, we have to make sure this whole transition is fair for everyone. Let's just zoom in on permitting for a second. I know it sounds super bureaucratic and boring, but trust me, it's a massive bottleneck. The IEA found that just to get the permits and build one new overhead power line can take up to 13 years in some places. 13. Just think about that. And it's not just the power lines either. What about all the critical minerals we need for batteries, for turbines, for solar panels? Well, opening a new mine, from the moment you find the stuff to the moment you pull it out of the ground, has historically taken over 16 years on average. We don't have that kind of time. We need to move so much faster. And this brings us to that last point, which is so crucial. This whole thing has to be fair. The report puts it perfectly, saying inclusive, people-centered approaches are essential. We have to make sure that the people who can least afford it aren't left behind, and that the benefits of this huge economic shift are actually shared by everyone. So when you step back and look at all the evidence, it's pretty clear. We're at a profound turning point, and it's been accelerated by this crisis. The big question is no longer if we're going to transition away from fossil fuels. The real question now is, how fast will that journey be? How secure will it be? And how fair will it be? And honestly, the answer to those questions is going to define the world we all live in for generations to come.